Isang makabatang araw sa ating lahat at welcome back po sa Bata-lakayan. Para sa ikalawang bahagi ng ating seryeng Women Unite for Girls, Breaking the Cycle of Child, Early and Forced Marriage and Unions in the Philippines, kasama naman natin si Atty. Laisa Alamia. Siya po ay isang member of the Parliament ng Bangsamoro Transition Authority. Tatalakayin naman niya ang mga problemang kaakibat ng child early and forced marriage sa Pilipinas at ang mga paraan kung paano natin ito matutundukan. Palakpakan po natin si Atty. Laisa Alamia.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much to Save the Children for the invitation to speak on this topic in your program, Bata-lakayan. My topic is on the problem of child marriage, specifically in the Philippines and in the Bangsamoro, and how to help end the practice in the Bangsamoro. Child marriage or marriage below the age of 18 actually happens worldwide. It's not just in the Philippines. While its prevalence is in decline, it remains common in different parts of the world. In the Philippines, the practice is highly associated with Moro and indigenous people. Based on statistics, approximately 726,000 Filipino children were married before turning 18 in 2017, according to the United Nations. Now, this placed the country number 12 in the absolute number of child marriages globally. 15% of our girls were married before the age of 18, and of this figure, 2% got married before they even turned 15. And this roughly translates to 1 out of 6 Filipino girls finding herself married before hitting the age of 18. Now, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, which is a new entity, an autonomous region that has been set up through a law, RA 11054. We are still in transition now, with a population of 3.8 million. And from these 3.8 million, more than half of whom are female. And in the Bangsamoro, ethnic minority Muslim women continue to face different forms and multi-layered discrimination on the basis of their SOGI or social orientation, their religion, their sex, ethno-linguistic group, among others, either in their communities or outside their communities. And this contributes to their vulnerabilities to abuse and violence. In the Bangsamoro, 62% of women in the BARM belong to poor families in 2018. That is more than half of the women in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao that belong to poor families. This is equivalent to more than 1.2 million women in 2018 who struggled to meet their basic food and non-food needs. What's worse is the poverty incidence among our children. So 68% of children in the BARM belong to poor families, according to the Philippine Statistical Authority data. In the BARM, there were approximately 88,600 child brides, according to the Bangsamoro Commission on Women. Now, these numbers are important to the child and early marriage discourse because the practice is deeply linked with the socio-economic vulnerabilities facing our children and families. Now, recently, in December 2021, the Philippines passed Republic Act number 11596, or the law prohibiting the practice of child marriage and imposing penalties for violations. This, in effect, criminalizes child marriage. Now, there are some key policies in this law that are sought to be implemented by the Philippine government. One is to abolish traditional and cultural practices and structures that perpetuate discrimination, abuse, and exploitation of children. Second is to abolish the unequal structures and practices that perpetuate discrimination and inequality. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of capacitated parties. And that child marriage is considered as child abuse because it debases, it degrades, and demeans the intrinsic worth and dignity of children. Now, there are penalties to the unlawful acts that are deemed as public crimes under this law, RA number 11596, which prohibits the practice of child marriage. So the following are the unlawful acts. One is facilitation of child marriage. Two is solemnization of child marriage. And third, cohabitation of an adult with a child outside of wedlock. So this is the live-in kind of partnership between an adult, meaning 18 years old and above, and a child outside wedlock. So a child is below 18 years old. That is now a public crime. Now, there are penalties under this law. A person who causes, fixes, facilitates, or arranges a child marriage will be subject to fines or and prison time, with a penalty of up to 12 years in prison if the perpetrator is a parent, a step-parent, or guardian of the minor. Now, those who violate the law by performing or officiating the formal rites of a child marriage or the solemnizing the child marriage will also receive fines and slash or prison time. And those in positions of public office will be disqualified from office. Now, what is the legal effect of child marriage under this law? Once this law is implemented, now child marriage is considered void ab initio, meaning it is null and void from the beginning. It is as if there was no marriage at all. The action and defense for the declaration of absolute nullity will not prescribe in accordance with the Family Code of the Philippines. Now, the implementation of RA number 11596 is actually suspended. So there is a transition period right now for 1 year within which the Section 4A and B and Section 5 shall not be affected or will be suspended, no, to Muslim Filipinos and indigenous peoples. And within that 1 year, the National Commission on Muslim Filipinos and the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples are required to undertake extensive measures and programs in their jurisdictions to assure full compliance with the law. So the law, again, is suspended. The application of the law is suspended to Muslim Filipinos and IPs for 1 year. Now, what are these Section 4A, Section 4B, and Section 5? So these are the unlawful acts of facilitation of child marriage for Section 4A, solemnization of child marriage for Section 4B, and Section 5, which says that these acts are considered as public crimes and can be initiated by any concerned individual. Now, the law has a repealing clause that states that all laws, decrees, executive orders, rules, and regulations, or any of their provisions that are inconsistent with the law are repealed and modified accordingly. And what does this mean? So there is a current law that has been in effect since 1977, the Code of Muslim Personal Laws. Now, this law, RA number 11596, has practically amended all policies on marriage, including the provisions in the Code of Muslim Personal Laws, which allow child marriage or marriage below the age of 18. Now, there are issues and contentions that have been raised from the Muslim communities, communities in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. And one of them is the law itself, PD 1083, which is the one of the subjects of debate relative to the child marriage, specifically on its provisions on Muslim marriages. And these are the issues. One of the issues that was raised was that RA 11596 actually contradicts the beliefs of Muslim communities and the established Sharia principles that are found in PD 1083. So that is the contention. And that the law was passed and decided upon by people outside the Muslim Filipino communities. There were also issues where they raised questions on religious freedom and the constitutionality of this law. There were issues on criminalization and the penalties, and that there are allegations that this law that prohibits child marriage and criminalizes child marriage will not apply to Muslim Filipinos because of their non-subscription to the family code. Now, these issues were raised mostly by Muslim leaders and some political leaders, personalities. I think it is important to recognize that any contentions could have been avoided if the legislation had emphasized inclusivity or the authorities expanded the discourse on the matter. And this only means that there is a need to continue the dialogues with the Muslim communities all over the country, specifically in the BAR. Now, on child marriage and Presidential Decree 1083 or the Code of Muslim Personal Laws. Now, the provision on marriage establishes and reinforces the inferiority of Muslim girls and women. If you read PD 1083, which allows child marriage or marriage below the age of 18, it is repugnant to the Constitution because these provisions violate the Philippine obligations under international law, specifically on child marriage. It contravenes the guarantee of equal protection. It falls beyond the ambit of religious accommodation, and it is not covered by the right of indigenous cultural communities to preserve and develop their cultures, traditions, and institutions. Why? Because again, the practice is harmful to both girls and boys. Now, on child marriage and Islam. Now, if you look at the history, Muslim women and girls have been subjected to unfair treatment within predominantly Muslim societies previously. This does not stem from the religious mandates of the Quran, as some may argue, because the Quran actually promotes the rights of women and promotes equality and equitable rights between men and women, boys and girls. Now, if we discuss about muamalat or the socio-economic aspect of the lives of the Muslims versus ibadat or the ethico-religious categories in Quranic legislation, interpreting verses that pertain to socio-economic relations may be subject to change and social development. And that is why you will find that in many predominantly Muslim countries nowadays, in the year 2023, their age of marriage has already been set at 18 years old. In some countries, it's at 19 years old. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the age of marriage is set at 19 years old. In Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, the age of marriage is set at 19 years old. It's only in the Philippines, in the Muslim communities, and under PD 1083, where the age of marriage is set below 18 years old. What is the age of marriage under PD 1083? For girls, it is when they reach the age of puberty, when they menstruate. And if they menstruate at 9 years old, they are already eligible for marriage. So just imagine 9 years old, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls getting married at a very tender age. So Islamic law dictates actually the fundamental equality of men and women, and that marriage is a contract. It is a contract, it is a covenant that can only be solemnized with the consent of both parties. So the consent of both the bride to be and the groom to be. Now, the effectiveness of consent at such a young age is a matter of grave concern. The question is, are children capable to give such consent if they are just 10 years old, 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old? Actually, legally, they could not give consent. They could not sign any contract without the presence of their guardian or their parent if they are below 18 years old. So, in the case of marriage, why is it that we allow marriage below 18 years old? And this is one of the reasons why, in many predominantly Muslim countries, other countries like Turkey, Jordan, even Algeria and Morocco, Tunisia, all of these countries have already increased their age of marriage. Now, what is the reason why um, a lot of us are advocating for the end of child marriage or early marriage or even forced marriage? What is the reason? What are the consequences? What's the impact of child marriage on children? Especially girls. And this also, there are also negative impacts or consequences on the boys. Actually, child marriage do not serve any valid purpose and pose significant harms to minors. The consequences of child marriage on girls and boys are numerous, marami, and far-reaching, directly causing grave harms, including the denial of education, perpetuation of poverty, and increased likelihood and risks of early pregnancy, childbirth, and consequently maternal mortality. There may also be, they're vulnerable. Girls are more vulnerable to sexual violence. So child marriage, if a girl gets married at a very young age, it's usually accompanied by early pregnancy and frequent pregnancy and childbirth, which results in increased maternal mortality rate. We have data on this. There's data in the Philippines, there's data all over the world that these are one of the dire consequences. This is one of the dire consequences of child marriage, the increased maternal mortality rates. For girls, child marriage perpetuates the cycle of engendered poverty, preventing many of them from continuing their education. And because they are unable to finish their education up to the college level or even up to the senior high, it reduces their opportunity, it reduces their employability, reduces their opportunity for employment. Once they get married, even if we say that they should continue studying, they should continue going to school, usually, if a girl gets pregnant and she has to perform responsibilities as a child mother over her child, then she would have to stop going to school. It is a necessary consequence of early pregnancy and early childbirth. So, girls who marry before the age of 18 are more at risk also of being subject to physical, sexual, and emotional violence. And looking at it generally, child marriage or early marriage and which are considered as forced marriages limit opportunities across the board, including those around sexual and reproductive health decision making. So, what are the ways forward? What do we do now? Now that we have a law that has been passed, which criminalizes the solemnization of child marriage, what do we do now? Now, the criminalization of child early and forced marriage alone is actually insufficient, even if we have this law, if we do not introduce complementary measures and support programs for this advocacy. Child marriage is a harmful practice that should be abolished because of its effect on children, especially the girls. It perpetuates discrimination against women and girls, abuse, and exploitation. While RA 11596 is an important and necessary policy to end the practice in the Philippines, we must ensure that this law will not be abused and that its implementation shall be guided by our genuine intent to protect our children and respect for religious and cultural diversity. We need to keep the conversations going. We need to reach out to Muslim, Filipino, and indigenous communities. We have to promote safe and pluralistic discussions with the communities and religious leaders and interest groups. Now, we also need to build on the data and the evidence that we already have now. This is to pursue a context driven and evidence based interventions in and outside the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Our partners in the civil society and international development organizations can help with this. For the Bangsamoro leadership, there is a need to follow through on the discussion on PD 1083 and RA 11596. There's a need to discuss the important issue of age of marriage and include the review of such structural and legal barriers in the regional governance agenda. For the national agencies, the action points during the transition period should include the coordination and cooperation with the Bangsamoro government, the representative of Bangsamoro people and their interests. And these include the national agencies NCMF and NCIP. The government's efforts to prohibit child marriage must include measures to challenge entrenched social norms and discriminatory gender stereotypes that underlie the whole practice of child marriage in the country. Under the new law, for example, the Department of Education is required to develop a sexual education curriculum that will include culturally sensitive modules and discussions around the impacts of child marriage in order to shift social norms and attitudes. So that is the more difficult part, how to shift, how to change social norms, how to shift the way people think and approach the issue of child marriage and even early pregnancy or pregnancy outside the bounds of marriage. In addition, the law directs other government agencies to develop programs and campaigns aimed at raising awareness. I think that is key to the success in the implementation of this law. It is to raise awareness about the effects of child marriage, and second, protect the victims. The government should make sure that mechanisms are in place to guarantee implementation of the provisions related to support, property relations, and custody. That's it. I hope you were able to pick up something from my presentation. Maraming salamat po. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Maraming salamat po, Atty. Laisa Alamia, para sa isang napakahusay at siksik na pagtatalakay ng child marriage dito sa ating bansa. Lalo na nung binigyan mo kami ng mga kadagdagang kaalaman tungkol sa child marriage sa bar. Para naman po sa ating mga manonood, sana ay marami po kayong natutunan. Pero hindi pa po tayo dito nagtatapos dahil abangan niyo po ang ikatlo at huling bahagi ng unang serye ng Bata-lakayan. Hanggang sa muli, paalam!